Hello, everybody. Welcome to Trek Politics, Episode 2, with me, Mary Trump, and my friend and co-host, Bob Cesca. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Mary. It's so great to be here.
And it is great to be here, especially since our guest is a guy we both think extremely highly of, the phenomenal Tim Russ, discussing the Voyager episode Living Witness, which he directed. It's written by, the story is by Brandon Braga. And Bob, it's not only one of my favorite Voyager episodes, it's one of my favorite episodes in all of Star Trek.
Yeah. It's so good. And there are meta aspects to it where you're seeing a simulation inside of a simulation inside of a simulation. It's a really, really well done, extraordinary episode with so much to unravel from a cultural, political perspective as well. So we're talking about season 4, episode 23. And in this episode, in case you haven't seen it, we're introduced to what appears to be a mirror universe Voyager called the Warship Voyager. And it turns out it's not the mirror universe. We find out it's within this museum simulation of something that happened 700 years in the past, where we see the Voyager crew being violent and merciless. 7 of 9 is still a full-on Borg. They're assimilating other people into their own little Borg collective aboard the Voyager. And it turns out that what we're seeing, though, as I said, is a simulation 700 years after Voyager's journey home through the Delta Quadrant. And it got me to thinking, just on a side note, that the copy of the Doctor that we see in this episode, which is based on a backup of the Doctor that was first backed up 700 years earlier, I wonder if this version of the Doctor in this episode is the same version of the Doctor we end up seeing in Starfleet Academy in the forthcoming Star Trek series, because that's also set 700 years after the main continuity of Star Trek. So I don't know if that's going to be the case, but that's something that was certainly front of mind as I was, 700 years in the future. That's the same as Starfleet Academy. So I kind of had a little bit of a nerd moment there, but I have no idea. But in this museum simulation, we see the crew of the warship Voyager intervening in a war between the Vaskins and the Kyrians, which are two different cultures and races on this planet. And the Voyager interferes in support of the Vaskins. And among other things, we obviously see these displays of violence, cold-blooded murder taking place. And the Doctor realizes, as the simulation is playing out, that he's in a simulation first and foremost. And then he's outraged by the museum's revisionist history of what actually happened. He said, well, this isn't how it went. And he's trying to tell the curator of this museum, this is not the course of events that I experienced 700 years earlier. And it turns out the Kyrians were the aggressors and Voyager was merely supplying medical supplies to the Vaskins. That's the actual history that the Doctor is trying to relate to the curator of this museum. And so, cutting to the chase, spoiler warning in case you haven't seen it, you maybe skip over this. The Doctor's actions in this episode lead to peace between the Vaskins and the Kyrians. And that's ultimately the sort of the positive ending that we get to by the end of the episode. And so I think Tim did a wonderful job directing this. Robert Picardo, of course, steals the show as the Doctor. And so I absolutely agree with you, Mary. One of the best episodes of Voyager, one of the best episodes of Star Trek, period.
Yeah, and it works on so many levels. And like much of Star Trek, and one of the reasons we're here, it is so relevant to our times. And I cannot think of a better person to walk us through both the episode and its relevance than the great Tim Russ. So let's dive in.
Incoming transmission.
Politics. I'm not good at politics. Surely there are others who are better suited.
Trek Politics with Mary L. Trump and Bob Cesca.
Oh, it's so great to have you here again, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today. I got to be honest with you. When I rewatched this episode this past weekend, I decided, oh, you know what? I want Robert Picardo to infiltrate the White House and yell at Donald for trying to change history. Because that was really he was such a great centerpiece of this episode. And I loved how he was going around, wait, this isn't true. That didn't happen. This is revisionist history in that classic Picardo kind of way. I said, yeah, you know what? That's what we need. And for that matter, Tim, why don't you go too? Because I know you can bring some
Please.
righteous anger to the situation.
Although
So that must have been a blast for you to direct this episode, especially with your friend Robert Picardo.
Absolutely.
I
And in fact,
just have one quibble with Bob's premise, though. We need
okay.
a Corin, not a Donald. Like, I'm not sure even Robert Picardo and the great Tim Russ could achieve
Right.
what the Doctor achieved. But sorry.
yeah. Well, it was only one. The Doctor had to deal with only one person. He had to deal with one person. He only had to convince one person, as opposed to what we have to do now is convince, I don't know, half the country. But it's one person that he had to convince to reveal the truth. And that was it. And he was the linchpin. So if that museum curator decided not to do it, then that we'd be stuck with what he'd be stuck with what we had. So in fact, I was very lucky to be able to draw that episode for a directing slot. I could have gotten, something not nearly as interesting, but I was coincidentally just lucky to have drawn that story. And I love history as well,
Wow.
and believe it's so vitally important in marching forward when you're trying to, when a society is developing or trying to develop, as it were. And so I was very lucky to have that opportunity to work with Bob, and also my fellow castmates in their evil versions of themselves, because that is
That's got to
always
be fun.
very rare. That was an absolute blast, and I didn't speak to any of them prior to rolling on the very first scenes of them in their dark sort of versions. I just showed up that day, and they came in. And they delivered. They had already worked on what they were going to do and how they were going to do it, and they just it was just, I mean, that is obviously the advantage of hiring professionals to do a job like that, is because they're going to prepare and be ready to go. You don't have to give them a lot of notes, and there's no notes. They just came in and did it, and it was just stellar. So I was so happy to be able to do that, and it was as much fun as you can imagine, because it's a very rare opportunity to see the good guys playing the evil versions of themselves. So wonderful, and of course the concept was perfection, because on the scales it was pretty evenly balanced. We know what was right and what was wrong. We discovered that. The question is, what's the ramifications? Do you expose it or do you not? Because you're going to have chaos if you don't, or if you do expose it, you're going to have chaos, and your society is just going to explode. Or if you don't, then you're living under this false pretense of what happened in the past, and half of your society is being is subjugated by the other half because of what they've done. They're being punished constantly and seen as the lower class and the redheaded stepchild because of what presumably happened in the past. So so the scales are even. They're very, very well balanced. And that makes for a very good story.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was so powerful is the way in which the evil version of the crew was completely organic to the story. It wasn't a mirror universe. It wasn't a holodeck game. It was what happens over 7 centuries when one side gets to control the narrative and completely alter people's perceptions of the truth and the historical record. So that to me was one of the initially fascinating things about the episode, and they did nail it. They're incredible.
Yeah, I think there's obviously, we're talking about that, either revisionist history or omitting history or rewriting history. And as the old saying goes, it's written by the victors. It's written by the people who are on the top, who have control of everything and have control of the word and the say so and the story. And what fascinates me about this story is we can apply that to our past as well, and not only our recent past, but also our ancient past. I mean, around the world, in terms of the cultures and the struggles and the conquering and the taking over and the exploiting, all these things. Uh, dare I say, the spread of religion, Catholicism, in this particular case, the church dominated the planet for centuries and spread their doctrine at the end of a sword. You know, this is what this is going to be, and you have to follow this, and this is, you know, and or a threat of death or torture if you didn't. Who conquered who, and how that story was related, and how it was told, makes the people who lost 9 times out of 10 look like the bad guys. You know, it is that information and that kind of thing. How much of that we have in our actual history, our actual real world history, how much of those stories have been altered and changed and recorded by only those who wanted their perspective told and presented. How often has that happened? How was the Wild West and the American Native Indians portrayed in the press that was being controlled by those who were dominating? Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, one of the things I kept thinking
it's the
about as I
same
was
thing.
watching this episode was the parallels to the Lost Cause mythology that arose after the Civil
Yes.
War,
Yeah.
certainly after Reconstruction, because this is a single planet with two different races of people battling with each other and with mass casualties and so forth. And the revisionist history that went along with the, maybe 700 years after that battle took place, after that war took place. So there is absolutely a parallel with the Lost Cause, which is one of the most pervasive examples of revisionist history and something that we're still contending with today, where
Yes.
it was, I think the Lost Cause as a thing, as a myth, existed from the late 19th century well into the 21st century. I think that was something, once we got to maybe 20 years ago, we started to re-examine these myths surrounding the causes of the Civil War and began to correct all of that. Where I don't see that necessarily as being revisionist, I believe that was what's been happening for the last 20 years or so, as far as erasing the Lost Cause, has been a correction to that false history, which those of you who aren't in the know, I mean, it was all about glorifying the Southern cause and making it seem as though this was something that was justified, secession, framing states' rights as being the central reason for the Civil War rather than slavery. Yeah. And then subsequent to that, I think one of the more unspoken aspects of the Lost Cause mythology was the attempt to demonize Black people as being a common enemy for white people to have. So one of the things that they wanted to do as far as furthering the Lost Cause is create this mythology where white people could unify or reunify post-Civil War around a common enemy. And that enemy became the Black population in the United States. By demonizing them, by stereotyping Black people, this is one of the most egregious examples of revisionist history, which, fast forwarding to now, subsequent to correcting all of that and erasing the Lost Cause, it appears as though in our modern times, in this age of fascist authoritarianism, we're seeing a return to the Lost Cause, where we're bringing back the names of the Confederate names behind certain military bases and revising what's going on, what's being presented in museums. In fact, I think Donald was talking today about specifically going in. There was I think it was something like 32 different artifacts have been removed from the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., including a book that was owned by Harriet Tubman. So this is the sort of thing we're seeing today. And once again, an incredible parallel between an episode of Star Trek as far as a cautionary tale and what we're experiencing now. I'm sure that Lost Cause must have been front of mind for you as you went through the process of producing this episode.
Absolutely. I mean, just again, the lost cause, which is more recent history, and again, all the way back to ancient history, same thing.
Yeah.
All those cases of the stories being told by the victors, and those stories being altered and edited and slanted in favor of the victors to make the victors look like
Hmm.
they're the ones who are the righteous winners and conquerors, and there's a reason why, and the bad guys are put down, et cetera, et cetera. Um, that just before I logged on, I just looked at an article that I guess is real, that Florida wants to take away the dictionaries and the encyclopedias for review. They're going content review, dictionaries and encyclopedias, which is, I think, directly in Orwell's 1984. I think the idea in
Yeah.
1984 was to reduce the size of the dictionary every year, was to take words out.
Hmm.
So they want
Hmm.
to take
Yes.
certain phrases, probably dictatorship, fascism, racism. They probably want to take those words out of the Webster's dictionary. Um,
Slavery, gay.
I'm not sure how that's gonna work or go. Just as a, I don't know how that's gonna fly. But that again is the same thing.
Hmm.
It's all that is part. It's the same thing. It's literally the same thing to try
Yeah.
to, yeah, to restrict the information, to make it go away so that it appears as though one side is squeaky clean and the other side is not. And this is, and on what's worse is that, well, down the line, well, gee, why are those minorities so upset? Why would they have any reason to be upset? Why would they feel that they were discriminated against? Well, we don't have any history to look at to be able to figure that out, because it's all gone. I'm surprised the African American Museum isn't completely done. It's like, I'm surprised he
Yeah.
didn't get rid of the whole thing,
Hmm.
because that's the first thing I thought about, is what are they going to do with the African American Museum? It's, it's the whole museum is the point of the African American history in the country.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they just didn't abolish the whole thing.
But isn't it more useful as the museum of the episode as a tool of propaganda? And I guess my question is, if they're removing exhibits,
Yes.
if they're altering the way people experience history, if they are sanitizing it. I mean, we've literally heard the president of the United States start to talk about the fact that slavery wasn't that bad, for example. I mean, that could be as powerful and maybe even a more dangerous tool to keep us ignorant, not by denying us any access to information, but by presenting us with information that's propaganda and disinformation. And it seemed to me that there's a bit of a parallel there to what was happening in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I see what you mean. As far as putting out an alternative version of
Yep.
what that was, that event, like you said, the Civil War, same thing. This is really, really, the war was fought over blah blah blah, not over this over here. And yeah, to be used as propaganda, as misinformation, 100% totally information. And in the episode, it was misinformation. That's what that
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
It was obviously revisionist history, but it was misinformation that everybody was
Hmm.
being fed all the time, and and that was consequently a museum. So yeah, it can absolutely be as damaging as having no information, available for anybody to learn. Of course, and we're under siege with misinformation at present. I mean, we're under siege, and have been since pretty much Fox News and the rest of the propaganda media out there started cheering and chanting that, instead of not only not reporting what actually happened or what actually the facts are, but just reporting something entirely different. It's entirely made up. This didn't happen. The house is on fire. There's you can feel the heat from the fire 3 blocks away. Yeah, everybody's standing around watching it, but one side says that the house is not on fire, and that's literally where we're at right now. Literally where we're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, Donald said today, he said, I got a little involved with museums because I had a little problem with the Smithsonian. We like a little more positivity. It was all about all the bad things in our country. I said, what about the good things we've done? So I got a little involved in that. Well, that's a gigantic understatement. He got a lot involved with that. He's euphemistically describing egregious revisionist history. And in defense of the curator of the museum in Living Witness in the Voyager episode, I think that guy, he didn't intentionally try to revise history. It's just how it got handed down to him over a period of time, and he was just interpreting
Yes.
what he understood to be accurate. He wasn't intentionally trying to change the course of events with the warship Voyager and the war between the Vaskins and the Kyrians. It's just like it was default. Okay, well, this is what I was always led to believe, so that's why this simulation is what it is. But now we're talking about the deliberate bastardization of what we know to be true. And that's what makes what we're experiencing right now so dangerous. And I hope, I get the sense that you're generally a hopeful person. And I think, do you believe that we can course correct once this dark period is over?
As I mentioned, I think when we were on the panel in Las Vegas before the convention, typically I've always been a realist and somewhat of a cynic. I sort of have been a glass half empty person. I'm not a raging optimist. However, there is evidence in our history that these social upheavals and turmoil have produced a development in societies in a leap rather than a gradual incline. So in the 1960s and 70s, which I lived through, the protests and the Vietnam War riots and the women's rights coming out, gay rights coming out, all that came out, which was a transition from the 50s and 60s, a complete transition, a complete upending of all of those norms that were going on from the 50s to the 60s. And it was turmoil. It was terrible. It was, the entire South went from Democratic to Republican as a result of that. That's how much turmoil was created. But as a result, look what we have up to this point right now. We had this giant leap. Women, their rights, their opportunities, their financial independence, their jobs, their careers, all these women out of the closet, out of the kitchen, which is where they were, was proposed that they would be and should be and would be happy in the kitchen, taking care of the kids and changing diapers. All of a sudden, that's gone. Gays out of the closet. You could not be out of the closet in the 50s and 60s. You'd lose your job or you'd be ostracized and whatever. You couldn't do it. And after that, now we have their gay relationships on commercials. And we had a huge jump for minorities, women and gays. We had it for the marginalized in our society as a result of that turmoil that occurred, post World War II. Before World War II, European countries were murdering and killing themselves for centuries, right up to after World War I, they were still trying to kill themselves. After World War II, now all of Europe is economically bound together and working together. And that was huge turmoil for the planet. But for our country locally, same thing. We had this turmoil in the 60s. This turmoil, I think this particular period in our time, when they're trying to erase all this, absolutely that can be restored. Actually, absolutely that can be put back in place. And hopefully, as a result of this, it will be amplified. It'll be even more so, all the way extending to what laws we can pass that actually can be enforced. And the way that government interacts and the branches of government oversee each other, that needs to be strengthened. That needs to be fixed. Something needs to be done in that category. So maybe something can come of that. But as far as the history and the museums and the things that they've taken away and renaming shit, all that stuff can be put back in place. The issue is, if you go through the trouble of putting everything back in place, does this idiot country go back and put somebody else in place to swap it around again in 4 or 5 years? I don't know about that, but we certainly can right the ship and get it back on course ourselves. It'll take a minute, but we could do that. I mean, it's just as easily as they're able to tear it down, we can rebuild it.
Right. Yeah, maybe a question for both of you is, what role does culture, the American culture, have to play in course correcting some of the revisionist history that we're seeing right now? Because I think that for all of our efforts as political activists, as commentators, and so forth, on specifically the political side of American culture, what role does the pop culture have to play? What role does Star Trek have to play as an ongoing franchise, as an ongoing saga, in fixing what is happening right now, let's say 4 years from now, and having that opportunity? Because I'm observing things like South Park, for example, really stepping up and taking on this fascist authoritarianism in a way that I think more strongly resonates than maybe some of us in our kind of political fishbowl, our political silo, attacking from within that. So for both of you, do you think that American culture, which I still believe is quite liberal, maybe not all of it, but certainly a significant chunk of it, what role does culture have to play as far as course correcting all of this?
Mary?
Well, I mean, I'm much more interested in hearing what you have to say. So I'm going to say what I think is, and then ask you a question on top of Bob's question. I think the role culture and the arts play is enormous, and I've been a little worried that artists with huge platforms haven't been banding together more, because I do think the arts are what's going to save us. I think fascism kills art, art kills fascism, and we need to be doing more to protect our arts and our artists. And we see what the Trump regime is doing to destabilize all of that, because they know what a powerful tool it is. But luckily, there are some things beyond the reach. $1 billion property, which is South Park, is not going to be vulnerable to attacks from Donald. And I think we have not learned the lesson that mockery is one of the most powerful tools we have, and subversive comedy. And we know that it has an impact because we see how people like Donald have been responding to it in a deeply unhinged way, which, is important. It's not the only tool, obviously, but it's a very important one. And then, Tim, just in the context of this episode, and the broader ethos of Star Trek, like, one of the things that I found so most compelling about this episode was something that Bob and I talked about last week: the ways in which Star Trek took its time, that they allowed deep conversations to unfold that have deep and resonating meaning to that apply to what we're dealing with, whether it was when the episode came out or now. And I'm thinking specifically, I want to talk about it later, but the last scene between Quarren and the Doctor, when they were arguing about what's the right way to do, just keep pretending or risk more conflict to get to the truth, what have you. But in the context of culture and art and the impact Star Trek continues to have, it's that kind of embracing of letting things play out, letting people talk, listening to what the other person has to say, no matter how much conflict there might be, and not immediately jumping to let's just end this with a fight or a battle or a war, and just reminding ourselves that art can operate on many, many different levels. And this episode, in my view, completely was so successful in reminding us that sometimes, in order to allow art to have the impact it can have, we need to be open to giving it time and letting those conversations happen.
Yeah. In point of fact, the artists and the creatives in our culture, in our society, who have always been around, as far back as Michelangelo and Da Vinci, they were always up against the church, and they are both were they were heretical. They fought back. They pushed back against that dogma. They did not like the church. They did not the church's rule over them and and domination over society and culture. And they fought back. Michelangelo literally sculpted a couple of pieces that were a slap in the face against the church. Da Vinci did as well. They were they were speaking out, but they're creatives, and our poets, our painters, our performers, our singers, our actors, our the arts, the people in the arts, the culture of the arts is to create. It's a creative endeavor. It's not capitalizing on parts of society. It's not corporate greed. It's not economic wealth. It's not trying to dominate. It's about creating and reflecting. Often, the culture, in this case, in our case, I think today, the arts are leading culture. It is influencing culture. In the past, it might have reflected what was happening in the culture. We do that as well. We will comment on what's happening and show it there. But in some cases, we can manipulate culture by putting things out that weren't seen before. A movie with a gay couple in it, right? If it comes
Mhm.
out, if it came out 30, 25, 30 years ago, that would be pretty edgy. But the introduction of that, and the more you see it, the more it becomes accepted. And that's what's happening now. Interracial couples on commercials, which is only a few years ago, not that long ago, that you never
Mhm.
saw that. I grew up without that, without any of that. And now you see it on a regular basis, blended families, all that kind of, oh no, we never see all that. And now we see all that. Now it's commonplace. So the
Yeah.
youngins that are growing up, okay, you're talking about changing culture. The young people who will lead the revolutions of the future, for sure, are going to be, if you will, conditioned, not groomed, but conditioned and customary. Not was it accustomed to seeing these elements in our society, so they no longer react to them adversely. So the artists create, in our society, and we reflect often in our society, and sometimes we comment. And the only ones pushing back, I think, the most right now, mostly are the comedians like
Mm.
South Park and the stand-up comics, Kimmel and Colbert. Um, we're pushing back the most
Yeah.
right now against this regime and commenting on what's happening and lampooning what's happening. I, I, I am. I have to. I know it's not just me. I know it's not just me. But from the United States all the way to Europe, in countries who they're not in our country, they don't have our president, they don't have our administration. They all the way from there to here are building giant floats and effigies of Donald, and just the most freakish lampooning things you can imagine. Satire from one end of the world to the other. I mean, what is that? What the hell is that? When I asked I talked to my friends about this. I said, let's see, you don't have the criticism, the booing, the effigies, the protests around the world for one person that you have for him. And I want to use the phrase he loves, in the history of the country. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure anybody who's a historian listen to this, they can respond to me. And I want to know if they come back. In history, I'm pretty sure in history, there has not been this much pushback on one leader of a country in the
It's like
world.
nothing you've ever seen before, I
The
Nothing
likes
you've
think.
of
ever
which
seen
we've never
before.
seen.
Seen
Yeah.
before. Yes,
Right. Right.
exactly. Yeah, and so I think yes, the artists are the ones. who are automatically going to come out and they're going to comment, because the artists create. We see society, and we see society in a different lens. We reflect society. We sometimes try to influence society. We comment on society. We comment on what's happening, and we are sensitive to it, because the artists are generally creative types. That's how it works. They're not corporate CEOs. That's just a different world,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sometimes worrying about how our the current anti-woke politics of the administration and some of the voices on YouTube and in the podcast sphere, if that effort is going to bleed into the culture. And we saw a little bit of it with Stephen Colbert getting fired post Paramount Skydance merger, and that process kind of taking a negative turn. And, we talked about this on our first episode back. We're worried that perhaps that's going to somehow affect the values of the Star Trek universe moving forward, like subsequent movies and TV shows, kind of leaning more toward, action adventure stories and less about values and compromise and diplomacy and things like that, things that have been sort of the centerpiece of Star Trek. So, I mean, question isn't necessarily about Star Trek specifically, but I worry about how much power the current administration has to start to guide the culture. And I hope in this sort of friction between culture and politics, I really sincerely hope that culture wins out. But do you think that that there's any chance whatsoever that the dominance of this fascist authoritarian regime is going to seriously affect our culture? Like you were talking about some of the portrayals of same-sex couples and TV commercials and movies and so forth. I sometimes worry that because of our politics now, we're going to see less and less of that, at least for the time being. So where maybe I get even more cynical than you are, Tim, I sometimes wonder if there's going to be this serious overcorrection, and there's going to be political pressure applied to the owners of these platforms that present our movies and our shows and really drive our culture. Do you think that that's going to turn out that way, or do you see the culture really driving the future, as it were?
Yeah, I think the attacks are on our media and on our entertainment by the fascist regime, as it were. It is problematic. It is worrisome. It is problematic. I think what it's going to come down to is probably the economic bottom line.
So I wanted to get back to that, the second to last scene, or the last scene between Corin and the doctor.
Yes.
Because it is optimistic and hopeful in a way I'm not particularly feeling either one of those things right now. And I think it's so relevant because I do feel like we are at this tipping point where we are going to have to make some very hard choices about what is worth fighting for and what is worth sacrificing. So it is the doctor who says, don't change the false narrative because people are going to get hurt. And I took an oath not to do any harm. I'm doing harm on a global scale. And Corin says, but what about the facts? And the doctor says, facts be damned, because right now is what matters. And Corin makes the case that history has been abused. And if you don't help us now, if you don't help set the record straight, it could be another 7 centuries of this delusion. And getting back to Bob's point about the lost cause
It's buffering.
Started to be perpetuated in the wake of the Civil War, obviously, and then we had 100 years of Jim Crow. But the seeds for the lost cause were sown hundreds of years before. And the North bought into a lot of the false premises of the lost cause. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, we did have 20 years of trying to rewrite the narrative to fit the facts. But 20 years is not enough to counter the century or the centuries. So I worry that since we're in the middle of a fascist authoritarian regime that seems to have control of all of the levers of power at the moment, and seems, at least for the time being, to have cowed corporate media into doing its bidding, that all of this is going to get normalized, and that the lost cause is not going to be about states' rights anymore. It's going to be about, well, things in the South weren't that bad. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the hopefulness at the end of that episode, which again was so compelling. It's just two men having a deep conversation about what's at stake and what is worth fighting and sacrificing for, as opposed to what we're dealing with right now. And how do you get a message through like that when there's so many, we're just facing so many headwinds?
Well, if you've got an illness or a broken bone or whatever it's got to be, that's got to be repaired. That's going to be a painful process, isn't it? But if you don't repair it, then the body could die, literally could die. So what they go through in that story is a very painful process. Yes, the doctor is committed not to cause harm, but at the end of the day, the doctor's the one that pointed all this out. And secondarily, the museum curator knows that what's right and what's wrong, and it's a painful process. The end of that show, that episode, is a riot. Society was going to explode, and it did explode.
Right.
And it may very well come down to the same thing here. We've already done it. We did it as I was growing up, the 60s and 70s. We were in the streets, man. Overturning cars, burning them, rioting. People were shot on campuses and killed, students, over protesting, over screaming out, over resistance. We had all of that stuff happening. We've had it recently, had it in recent years. Protests around the world. We have the protests here. We have, it could get a lot worse than that with military and the National Guard and everybody else pushing back. And we're pushing back now, physically in the streets. The riots that take place in the end of that episode are a result of growing pains. It's a result of the surgery necessary to kill the cancer, to reset the broken arm. That hurts like hell, but you'd have to reset it in order for it to heal. And it's going to take a minute for that to heal. I'm hoping, again, what I mentioned earlier is that the revolutions are begun and carried out by the young people. So young people growing up today, with any luck at all, because they are exposed more to voices on the internet, YouTube and otherwise social media, than they are anywhere else. And I am hopeful that they, because their attitudes are very different, obviously, than those of a 65-year-old, person in Arkansas somewhere. That's just a different vibe. So I think they're looking forward. They're looking more towards the arts. They're looking more towards the creative. They're looking more towards the change, because they're going to be living in this mess that we've created. They're going to be having to deal with climate change directly, energy sources, food, everything else, and even housing and living. Right now, they're having a tough time struggling because they can't make enough money to get their own apartment. So they're going to be wanting to make changes to all of these things. And those are the people that are being influenced the most right now. I think, and most of them, I think the vast majority of them, are not on board for the fascist authoritarians. And the corporations, and again, the major corps don't have any control over what the young people see on streaming networks, social media, and the like. They have nothing. They can do nothing about any of that. Nothing, zero. They're powerless. The major corporate media outlets are dying. They're dying. They're losing an audience. Their audience is dropping off like flies. From now in the next 20 years, it's going to be done. So they're going to have to shift. They are going to have to shift their message and their stories and their concepts to the audience of my daughter right now and those coming behind her.
Yeah.
See, so they're going to have to adjust.
Yeah.
They're not going to put up with whatever nonsense is what's going on right now. They're not going to put up with it.
Yeah, I wanted to add, and this is not necessarily a question, but to follow up with what you're saying, Tim, is I think it's so crucial right now for all of us especially for the benefit of our posterity, for our children and their children and so on, to get our hands on as much physical media as possible, printed books, printed published media rather than digital media, something that is irreplaceable in a sense. Because I'm sort of an amateur Civil War historian. A couple of weekends ago, I was up at Gettysburg, another sojourn up to the battlefield and the visitor center there in particular this time. And as I walked around the visitor center and was watching some of the film presentations they have there, the cyclorama and so forth, this time I really had a sense of profound sadness and a feeling of loss, because that visitor center still, as of right now, is interpreting the Civil War in exactly the way it should be, putting slavery front and center, and making sure to emphasize the fact that the reason the war happened was not states' rights and all the nonsense and bullshit that the Lost Cause put forth for so many years, but these other causes. And such an important way to interpret the war and to establish an interest and knowledge in the Battle of Gettysburg in this particular case. And I just kept thinking, especially too, as I was walking through the bookstore, I kept noticing books like the 1619 Project and things like that. How much longer is this going to last? Are they going to revise the introductory film that they show? Are they going to revise the narrative and the story that you get as you walk through the museum and see the artifacts? And I was very deeply concerned and left with just this profound, I wanted to go back and grab it all up and hang on to it, and not lose touch with legitimate history before the fascist revisionists get their hands on it, which I feel to a certain extent is kind of inevitable at this point. I hope it's not, but it's very, very possible given what we've seen so far. So I can't emphasize this enough. If you have printed history books, printed narratives about things like the Civil War, recent history in particular, hang on to that, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or next year with taking all of that away, in a sense. So if you can get to a battlefield park, if you can get to a national park and see how it's being interpreted now, it's so crucial, not just to support the national parks, but to support legitimate history. So I just wanted to add that here as we get close to wrapping up.
You know, the Civil War itself was a critical battle and a critical time in our history. And for a while there, it looked like Lincoln was not going to come out on top of that thing right up until the end. I mean, it was not looking good. But, you know, the way the pendulum swung, everything went around, and he stuck with it. He had the right people in place. As I was saying, the curators, in that story, the curator is the key. So the people that come in that have the responsibility, it's going to come down to those individuals that are in positions of responsibility to maintain, responsibility to correct. And in that story, he makes a decision to do the right thing. Yes, chaos ensues. That's what's going to happen. Like I said, there's going to be some pain, and potentially some pain, or could be some pain. In this case, I don't think we're going to see all that. I think what we're going to see is just a gradual, shift to what should be the case by people who are responsible. Whoever takes over that position in this museum or that museum, or this book publishing company, or that outlet in the federal government, or this school over here, this university, whoever takes charge or control, who has a moral compass, will make those changes. And I think the demand from those that they serve will also push back as well. I think this is going to be something that the country realizes was a huge mistake, and
there's the hopeful Tim Russ I was looking for.
Say, I think there's going to be a good chunk of the population that realizes that perhaps we should not have let the hairdresser fly the 747. That is what I think. Right. is going to happen. I believe that will happen. Um, and we can always obviously only wait and see, but and if it takes to the streets, then so be it. It can get ugly here and there, and that if that's the case, that's what happens. Quite frankly, I have no problem with that. I think that gets to turn more heads than not when people get in the streets. What is it?
Yeah.
3%, 4% of the population. That's all it takes to
That's
raise
right.
hell in the streets, and you're going to get something changing, and that ain't that many people.
I've been wondering since the Iraq War why there haven't been massive protests on a daily basis. We need to learn from other countries who do seem to be able to get millions of people out in the streets, I think.
Oh yes,
'Cause
yes. What is it?
if
Yeah,
not now, when? Really?
yeah. We've done pretty well. I mean, we
Yeah.
have had a lot of protests. The
Yeah.
Million Woman March, man. I was flabbergasted by that, and that was just his first term. He hadn't even been in office 20 minutes, and that was enormous. And
Yeah.
again, not just here, but overseas as well. But we've had them. We've been having them regularly, and and obviously in some places there's pushback.
Yeah.
There's pushback from governors, pushback from institutions, pushback. There is pushback, and I think that is not going to go away. And we just need a little more of it. We need more of it to happen. I think again the fallout from their policies and the fallout from his actions. What is it? The Hyundai plant that got raided by ICE, or 475 South Korean. They were there training people. They were scientists, the professors, chemists. They were training the people to build the cars. And now the whole thing is done, and all those jobs that were supposed to be at the plant, American jobs, are not there. So, yeah, that kind of thing, I think, is going to have some repercussions along the way. That and many, many more are going to have some kind of pushback. I mean, some of us are okay. I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I'm in California. Right, so I don't have to worry about it so much, but there's a whole lot of people out there that do. So I think it's not going to be as bad as it could be. I think this upheaval and this turmoil may very well, project the society in even a much more steep angle in the opposite direction. I think that the pendulum swing might be so much more to the other side. My only concern is that it stays on the other side.
Yeah,
That's
agreed.
my concern, is that we keep doing this.
Yeah.
We keep going back and forth and back and forth. I mean, the roads are littered with dead squirrels who couldn't make a decision. You gotta go one way or you go the other way, and you gotta stay in the course. Otherwise, you're nothing. Nothing happens. So
I think it's actually worse than that. The pendulum swings, but it always swings further and further to the right, and it never really gets past just a little bit left of center. So I'd like to see it stick much farther to the left. But
yes, I would too.
Yes,
I would too.
Yeah,
it's going to be it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. We can't see the future right now because that would be a Twilight Zone episode or maybe a Trek episode to be able to see what's going to happen in the future. But we'll follow the course. We'll see what goes down and watch what happens. There's some kind of evolution is going to take place. An evolution is going to take place, and a change is going to happen. An evolution is going to happen. All of that's going to happen. If God help us, if we make it to the next 50 years from now, you can't imagine what things are going to look like. We can't imagine, but they will look different than they do today. Yeah, that is for sure.
Right. Yeah. See, that was the hopeful Tim Russ I was talking about earlier. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like darkest before the storm, man. I don't know. Yeah.
All right, Tim. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this amazing episode of Voyager that you had so much to do with. In fact, just real quick question before we do wrap up, and then I will absolutely let you go. I was fascinated to find out that it was just kind of a lottery that you ended up getting this episode. because it's so serendipitous. This is like one of the perfect episodes for you to be involved in. So, really that was just by sheer chance that you were assigned that episode?
100% sheer chance, because
Wow.
my comrades who've also directed other episodes, some of them
Mhm.
got some interesting ones, and some of them got a couple of turkeys.
Yeah.
It's up to whatever script is in line for that particular week.
Mhm.
If they give me a week, if they assign me a week to direct, whatever story is ready to go for that week, that's what I get. And it is 100% serendipitous. There's 100%
Yeah.
luck of the draw, just a dice roll. And quite honestly, Bob, I got to say that my career in general, there's been a tremendous amount of luck involved.
Hmm.
It's pure and simple, man. It's the universe. It's simply what it is. It's
Yeah.
random, and it just worked out. Again, I can't tell what's going to happen in the future. So whatever decisions I make, I have no idea what those ramifications are going to be.
Yeah.
And I did make a couple of them in my early part of the career that if I had made those decisions and actually acted on them, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. It was
Sure.
just it was just I made a decision to go A instead of B, and here we are. And I don't know what the other direction could have been. It could have been greater than it is now, but who knows? At the end of the day, all of that has to do with that one element that we cannot control. And that is the future. That is the unpredictability, the random universe. We just don't have a say about any of it, man. None of it. And that goes to say what
Hmm.
we're going through right now. It's entirely up in the air. It is
Yeah.
entirely, as much as we can assume and guess and hope and whatever, none of that matters. The
Mhm.
random universe is going to dictate what happens. That's
Yeah.
it. And we're stuck with that, ultimately. So,
Well, in addition to being a closet optimist, Tim, you're also quite humble. You're one of the smartest, most talented people I know, and I think that had a lot to do with your success as well. So, congratulations on an amazing episode of Voyager, and continued success to you. And thank you for your activism and your voice. It's so important right now, and really, really appreciate everything you do.
thank you very much. I appreciate that, Bob. There's a few of us out there doing it. And it may not be a lot, but there's a few that got a voice. So it's very good.